Hi, Douglas Coombes, and welcome to this interview. Thank you for joining us. Of course, you're famous as a broadcaster and a producer with BBC initially, and then as a composer, as a choral director, linked with BBC TV Songs of Praise, School Choir of the Year, as an orchestral conductor, the Battle Proms, and now you're working towards Blenheim Palace. And also, although you've got all this amazing experience and success in your career, you have always still connected with the grassroots and supported community music and local musicians as well. You have the whole breadth there.
Yeah. Uh, Gosh, I'm beginning not to recognize myself now after all that. Um, it, it- I try to do so many things because I enjoy it. I mean, basically, I really enjoy, working with people. And I remember a long time ago uh, talking with people like Imogen Holst, the daughter, I'm sorry to name drop them, of Gustav Holst. I had some lovely conducting lessons from her.
Mm.
And she actually made an interesting statement when she said, never lose contact with, as you put it, the grassroots.
Well, of course,
And
Gustav was famous for that as himself, wasn't he?
yeah, and the interesting thing is she went on to mention people like Gustav Holst, Vaughan Williams, and Benjamin Britten, who in their writings always remembered, if you like, and I mean that nicely, the amateur, not just the
Yes,
professional,
yes,
and embraced both worlds.
yes.
And I've always remembered that. And even to the extent is that I love the opportunities of the amateur working with the professional. Now, that also includes children working with adults to give them an all-round feel of what can be achieved and to make sure that, for example, you talk about music in schools, that music isn't just in schools, but music is throughout the world for all ages. I mean, sometimes people just say school music. I'd rather just say music
Yes, yeah,
in that way.
yeah. So tell me about you're a conductor, both choral and orchestral, um, and you've established a fantastic reputation for this. Tell me about how you prepare to lead an event. So, for instance, you've been leading the Battle Proms, which is a massive outdoor proms event. But you've
Yeah.
got an orchestra in front of you, or you've got choirs in front of you, and often you've got people who really do know what they're talking about. They are professionals in their own rights. They're at a high level. How do you prepare to direct ensembles like this?
Well, the point is that um, it always starts with the music, and I feel that's the most important thing. And it's also important for me to understand the music, to know the music, uh, and also to know the abilities, especially if it's the choirs, the amateurs, what they can do and what they can't do.
Can
So
I
another,
pick that apart a bit? So you say understand and know. What does that mean for Douglas Coombs? How do you get to the stage where you really do understand and know a score?
uh, well, A, through experience, but just working at it. I mean, for example, when I'm looking at a score, I want to know that the composer and the arranger knows what they're really doing and that there's nothing sort of untoward, uh, almost impossible for the orchestra to play, or it's so difficult for them to bring in the phrasing and all the rest of it. What I try to do is to commit the score as much as I can to the mind. So I use it, the score, as a prop. John Bob Raleigh once said is that he always had a score in front of him. I only don't have a score in front of me if I can write it all out from memory. So in other words, it's just a memory jog.
Right.
So that's the first thing. The next thing I do is to make sure that I know it so well so that everybody, the professionals and the amateurs, can see me, can see my face, and I can see them. I mean, I find is the absolute key. The other thing is that, and this is not showing off, from the professional point of view, I want them to realize that I know the music and that they can trust me.
Mhm.
And that in many cases, because of shortest rehearsal time, I want them to realize that I know the music better than them, even though they can play it better than me, which I feel is essential. And so all the time, I want a feeling of its teamwork. Now,
There's an interesting concept coming out there, Douglas, because you're saying that you want to know the music better than them, and that's not through an instrument; that's in your mind.
yeah, that's right.
So,
Yeah.
so in other words, as a conductor, do you constantly, throughout your career, have you found that you've been training your mind?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And that is so important. Uh, when you're working with a professional group, um, shall we say you're working with a group that's played the Beethoven Fifth Symphony thousands of times.
Mm.
So for them, they'll say, oh, what's he going to do? You know, and basically what I like to do with an orchestra, for example, a professional orchestra, is I like to let them play. Uh, uh, it's no good me stopping them straight away. I want to see collectively as a team what they're going to do. Then it's up to me to make little points regarding ensemble, maybe tuning, maybe balance, and things like that, which can be different depending on the acoustic and where we are.
Right.
And I think the key thing is to let them play, to let them actually bring the music to life. You make suggestions that honestly you should make in the light of your knowledge of the composer, and not because you want to do this and that. I do remember many years ago at Aldeburgh, a masterclass taken by John Carroll Case on a Mahler song. The soprano, whose name I've forgotten, was singing, and he kept stopping her and said, but it's not in the score. And she kept saying, this is how I feel. And after a bit, he stopped her and said, you know, if you go on singing like this, nobody will employ you because you are so willful to the composer. Now, that was really direct, which I think is very refreshing because that isn't often said to people.
Right.
So, in other words, it's to be as honest as you can. Now, when you're working with choirs and orchestra, the orchestra being professional, the choir being amateur, it's so important that you make the amateurs particularly a part of the team, and that no one is more important than other. They're all together. And you yourself are a member of the team. Now that has implications that if, for example, something is happening because you're slowing up and they're running out of bow, it means changing the bow, and the leader says to you, look, we don't want to change bow here because of what follows next. It's up to you to quickly realize that and to say, okay, I'll just change it here. Mm-hmm. So in other words, it's always working. It's not always me, 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 forget the rest.
So it's listening as well.
And the point is, that approach is also the one I use with choirs. Now, you may know more than the amateur, but the amateur may say something which is absolutely right. And so they may not be able to express it. So you help them say, okay, let's do that. It might be wait on a word. It might be where a breath, oh, we can't manage this. Well, let's stagger the breathing. Oh, I can't do that very well. So we compensate in various ways. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. So when you hear these scores in your mind,
yeah.
Are you able to hear chords? Are you able to hear pitches? Have you had to train yourself to be able to hear? I mean, of course, Beethoven's extremely famous for going deaf and writing some of his greatest works even when his hearing was impaired. Yeah. Do you hear chord progressions? Do you hear different parts? Or have you had to train yourself to do that? Have you had to do exercises in your earlier days?
The main exercise, which is all due to a piano teacher called Horace Paul when I was very young, and various things. That's where it stemmed from. And we used to have 2-hour music lessons, which were quite interesting, actually. My father and mother, they were hairdressers. and they had the saloons downstairs, and he would come to our house, or the shop, as it were, and we lived above it. And I always remember this, is it was like an hour piano lesson and followed by an hour of general musicianship, general various things like that. And sometimes it would get so excited, he would stamp on the floor and things like that. And my father would always say, sometimes the customers say, whatever's happening upstairs? And he would say, oh, it's just my son Douglas having piano lessons, like that. And then suddenly there'd be a bump. And he said, he said, they've moved the piano now to one side of the room. There'll be another bump. No, they're not satisfied there. They moved it back into place again. so I always remember that. What I learned is this, and what I still do now. When I have a piece of music, whether it's one I've written myself or a new bit of music, depending on the foot, let's take a choir for the moment. So I then, when I've got the score, I sit down, and what I personally like to do is to imagine an ideal performance. So I sit, read it through, text and everything, and then when I've more or less got that in mind, and it might take 2 or 3 goes at this. Sometimes shaving is very good. My wife Carol says, you've thought that while you've been shaving. Yeah, that's right. Or out for a walk. When I've more or less got the ideal performance, I then try to rehear it as the choir I'm working with would probably sing it. Now, that is if I really know the choir. And with my own choirs, I'm always saying when I have conducting pupils, know your choir. Now, so when I sit down and I try to hear my choir, I begin to hear, I'm going to make up names, I hear Frida, and that's where she's likely to go sharp there, or she won't get that note, and so on. And gradually, in that way, I begin to hear what my choir will probably do. And then I compare it with the ideal performance, so that when I go in front of the choir, I can almost anticipate what they're going to do and therefore correct it before they've done it.
Yes, yeah.
And that helps me enormously.
That's back to your team, isn't it? That's knowing your team.
Yeah, absolutely. In the same way is that I've been doing Zoom rehearsals. Now that's interesting because I can't hear the choir at all. And I know there is a method where you can. There's a certain latency about that. But what I've learned absolutely tremendously from the Zoom is my development of understanding and knowing body language. That's absolutely. It goes back to when I worked for the BBC and I did a program like Singing Together. I always did the program, usually on the Saturday, recorded it before the Monday. That close. Used to worry some people.
Yes.
And then when the program went out, I would usually be in a school watching it. So I would know generally what was going on. And therefore, in some scripts, I would say, and now, here we go. We're going to sing such and such a song. Come on, you at the back, sit up. And she would write in and say, how did I know that people in the back were not sitting up? I said, I just know this. I can see things, you know. I never let on because I knew that there's sometimes when they've got a huge period of concentration, I think some conductors forget after, even with professional, huge period of concentration, they need some light relief or some tell a joke. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
And various things like that. So I feel, you know, that's what I mean by really understanding and knowing everything.
Knowing where they have to literally just take a laugh for a minute, take a break because they've reached their concentration level, refresh them, and then move back on.
So when you have the score, they're studying the score so that you know it. So you know where the melody is, the phrasing, where the breath's going to be taken, dynamics, and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
Then, so that's the first stage. The second stage of the preparation, which I feel is so important, is when you then sit down, for me, to hear the ideal performance that suits me, and then try to hear the performance of the group you're going to work with, if you know the group.
Right.
If you don't know the group, you have to work very fast, because you keep your ideal performance in your mind and off you go. But it is not, be prepared to change, because you've got to take in mind the acoustic, which some people forget, and various things like that.
So let's just take a slightly different direction on this. So there's that preparation, and if you're directing a choir, you're thinking about everybody singing the same kind of vowel shapes or placing the consonants in the same place. If you're leading an orchestra, you're thinking about bowing, etc. What about finesse? Because you're a highly regarded conductor at the top level there, and there are many people, singers or pianists or organists, who can play well, and they want to get that finesse. So how do you prepare for finesse if you've got an event that's going to be attended by a lot of people or watched by highly critical people? How do you gain that polish? What is that polish? What is finesse for you?
Well, finesse to me is honestly trying to achieve what you think the composer would stand up and shake your hand and say thank you. That's the most important, because any piece of music is somebody's baby. It's not yours unless you've written it and composed it yourself or arranged it. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
When you've arranged something, that's sharing a baby, as it were, as I call it. So, having said that, and you've done all the preparation, the next important stage, I feel, is do not get in the way of the music. If you conduct it, we are now talking about your body, your posture, your gesture. And when you're working with a choir or orchestra, for example, if I'm doing a workshop and I suddenly find a conductor will start talking too much, my immediate thought is he is covering himself because he can't convey what he wants by gesture. Mm-hmm. So that to me is a weakness. Mm-hmm. I mean, some people, okay, you've got to know about the composer, and sometimes you can say one or two crisp words like that. I mean, I remember, for example, doing the start of In the Hall of the Mountain King.
In the Hall of the Mountain King, yes.
And it starts with, it starts actually, not bom, 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 but it starts with a horns playing, and stop sound. Bah. Now, when you hear many recordings, they go, bah, they play it nicely. Mm-hmm. But if you read the play, it's to do with the evilness and all the rest of it. And to me, with the stop note, it wants to sound a little bit evil, mm-hmm. like that nasal. Mm. And I remember the first time I did it, the two horn players were most surprised, and nobody's ever said that to us before. I said, well, try it. I don't think they liked it because it was new, but it achieved what I felt, honestly, Grieg wanted. Do you know what I mean?
Yes, I do. So tell me about something choral. So obviously choral music has the technical side, if you like, is the vowels and the consonants, yeah, and being in tune and coming off together. But the musical side, the expression, is something different, and that's part of the finesse in a solo singer's work or a choral work.
Well, I really believe it's done through the rehearsal, so the choir trust you. Which I've seen some conductors do, and what it is showing off to the audience. You are conducting for them, so you're at one. Now the point is that what I think is a key is that all the time you're conducting, you're listening at two moments. You're listening to the choir as they are performing at that very moment. Mm-hmm. And the other thing is, another part of your mind is 2, 3, 4, 5 bars ahead. In other words, when you're playing the piano, if in fact your total mind is on the moment you strike the keys, you'll start hesitating because you've got to look farther ahead.
Yes.
And I have a friend of mine who I sometimes have turned over for him, and he alarms me because he's sometimes 4 bars ahead in his mind. So I turn
Right.
earlier for him, from there. And that's exactly what I mean. So
Yes.
you're prepared, you don't get away with the music, you do your movements, you don't do exaggerations, the choir there. And what in fact interests I find is this: if the choir, amateur choir, is doing well, I sometimes say to myself, what am I doing here? And I'll walk off and leave the choir. With my ladies' choir, the Meaty Singers, the very, very first time I did this, they were singing, and I thought, I'm enjoying this. I want to listen to this. And I walked off to one side. And as all the singers were still singing, and all their heads turned and followed me, and then they went back. And at the end, one of them, I mean, it didn't change. One of them said to me, "Are you all right?" I said, "Yes, I'm enjoying it so much." Like the audience, you don't need me. Just go on and just sing. And one of them said, "Yeah, but we need you." I said, "No, you don't. You proved it. You don't." Now that's what I call teamwork.
Yes.
Now, whether that adds to the finesse, I don't know. I often say to the orchestra, let me turn it in professional terms for a moment, because here we have players who know what they're doing, blah, blah, blah. So we may do 3 concerts. 1 and 3 are good, always good. Number 2 is exceptional. Why? Nobody knows. Somehow, magic, it just happens. Everybody got outside the right side of the bed for, I don't know what it is. And lots of people, when you talk to people, they just say, it just happens like that, always good. I mean, on another part, because I was talking about some players there, I remember a long time ago when I was at school, at Bristol Grammar School, where there was no music. I never did music at school.
Right. Wow.
Horace Paul always let me music. In the end, I was having 14 free periods a week, sat in the Great Hall. I was doing no science. They thought I might blow up the school. So that I was doing, privately from there, which was wonderful there. I've lost the track. I've forgotten what to say at the moment. You have to help me for the moment before I interrupt myself.
Professional finesse.
Oh, yeah. No, another thing. So what happened was that every now and then we'd get people talk to us, and we had a young bass singer came to talk to us, David Franklin. Do you remember him?
Oh yes.
Bass singer. And he had, a few weeks previously, he had sung with the Kirov Opera, and he had to actually catch a taxi at the end of the performance, catch the last plane, and be in London next day. We had a rehearsal at Covent Garden. And while he was singing this role, I think it was Boris Good or something like that, whatever he was singing, he kept worrying about, will the taxi be there, blah, 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 blah. And when he'd finished, he had no idea what he'd sang. And the audience stood on their feet, applauded. And some say that was the best performance he ever gave. And I talked to some musicians, and like the Strauss Waltz, Lord, where am I? Have we done that repeat? Everything like that.
Yeah.
Sometimes your mind starts drifting, and sometimes you get wonderful performance. Sometimes you can have finesse when your mind wanders. It's up to a conductor not to wander. So in one respect, it's a magical thing. But the key is, don't get away with the music. Don't do anything absolutely abnormal. Concentrate on the singers. Don't conduct for the audience.
So is the magic for connecting the soul to the music not really connecting the soul to the music, but in fact not having a block between the music and the performance?
I think it's a bit of both. I really, personally, I think it's a bit of both. I just feel it is so important that in the rehearsal, or even when you start and you haven't got much rehearsal at all, you have to convey as quickly, yeah, from the players they're looking at and the singers, we can trust this guy. In other words, they're not playing for the mortgage.
Right. And so to summarize, your view on gaining the performance that you want is connecting with the composer's intention and
Absolutely.
being authentic and having integrity with regards to their original intention.
As much as possible. So that means when you're trying to be honest with the composer, you must know about the composer, his life. You must know other works.
Mm-hmm.
Now, my big problem with so many conductors of choral music is that they sing a piece. Who wrote it? Oh, they don't know.
Mm.
So you mean you've done a piece by a composer, you don't know much about the composer. Have you looked at other works he's done or other arrangements? No. Well, how can you then honestly come to terms? Oh, well, I just look at the music. But there's more to it than just the music. You know,
Yes, and of course, the notation is only ever an approximation of what we actually do, isn't it?
absolutely. I mean, time and time, I don't have to say this to orchestras. Um, I say this to amateur choirs. How long is the minim? And if it's in 4/4 time, someone will say 2 beats. Okay,
Yeah.
so when do you come off? On the second beat, a bit after, or before? Depends on the phrasing and various things like that, and
Yeah.
depends on notation. I mean, some people who want you to come off exactly on the bar line or whatever, sometimes will tie over to a semiquaver or a quaver.
Yes.
And you know what I mean?
Yes.
In one respect, in spite of the exactitude of notation, it is still inexact, if I can put it like that.
Yes, and to give you an example of a minim there, of course, that minim's got a beginning and an ending, but it's also got a middle, and the notation doesn't show what happens in the middle of the note. When you're playing the piano, that's quite easy because you put the note down and it fades. You have no control over the middle.
You have the
But
decay.
in a choral sense, all sorts could happen in the middle of that note.
I mean, that's what some people don't quite understand is that in respect, as regards like phrasing, I'm not talking about big chords like that. With an orchestra, they'll know when to come off. In one estate, you don't have to bring them off. They'll
Yes.
do it. They follow the beat. Choral music, unless you've really trained the choir for some time, you've got to indicate the ending.
Yeah.
And that's the big difference. I mean, people sometimes say, what's the difference between orchestral conducting and choral conducting? In many respects, yes, there are differences, and you've got to be aware of them. I mean, for example, if you're conducting an orchestra and you want them quiet, you can do this with your hand. Do that with some choirs.
Yeah, they go flat. Yeah.
I know they go flat.
Yeah.
So in other words, with choral conducting, if you want them quiet, you needn't tell them this, but if you bring your hands like this, not together because that's tightness, if you do that, that'll have the same effect.
Hmm.
What is often the case is that, especially with strings, I tend to conduct strings like I do choirs. And so if I want them quiet, I very rarely do that. I do this to myself, and I don't have to explain it. They know. Which is, there's no need to be flamboyant and all the rest of it.
Perhaps it's got a connection with the bow movement and how
Oh,
far
yeah.
the bow travels within a specific amount of
Oh,
time.
yes, and therefore, it's a matter of trust. If they're trusting me, I trust them. So if they're doing a diminuendo, I hope that by then, working with me, they know the length of that diminuendo, they know how to control the bow, and they know that I'm watching the bow. So when it comes to the end of the tip, I'm bringing them off.
Mm.
Do you know what I mean?
Mm.
And so we're working together.
Mm.
And it's things like that. I mean, we had a case last Saturday when we were doing the 1812 overture. Now, the 1812 overture starts with the cellos of viola coming in, but I've had to rearrange it because under the COVID conditions, instead of an orchestra of 60, it's been reduced down to 35.
Mhm.
So I rescored the whole lot um, and made it more like a string quartet, violin one, violin two, viola, cello, with odd violin coming in as we go there. And because they were socially distanced and unusual, and because they know the work so well, played mainly by cellos on my right, but here they are really spread out. It was a terrible job for the moment to get it moving there, because what happened is that towards the end of the opening, where the wind came in, they had slowed up before, we got to that moment, the wind came in and they really couldn't sustain the notes properly. So, quite rightly they objected. And I said, yeah, I know. I said, look, I will rewrite this so I can and just use it for violas and cellos. Perhaps I should have done that in the first place. The leader, Barry, said, no, for his own personal satisfaction, let's try and get this right. Okay. So I did one or two things and we got it right and everybody was happy. But that's what I mean about teamwork and working together where they can trust you. And the thing is about conducting, particularly about anything in life actually, is that only the confident person, the really confident and knowledgeable person will say, I don't know, help me.
Mm.
The blusterer will do all sorts of things. And I mean, what an orchestra hates, for example, and I try to teach my choirs the same thing, is they hate a conductor who obviously doesn't know the score and practices on them. They absolutely hate that. And equally, they hate the saying, and I've now told the choirs to do this, my own choirs, they hate it when a conductor, because I use the choirs for conducting sessions, say, let's do that again. The answer to that is why? We need to know. Why are you doing it again?
Douglas, so there we're talking about repetition. And
Yeah,
in fact, that applies to any instrument. If you're playing the piano or something and you're practicing,
absolutely.
if you just repeat things mechanically, what's the purpose? So you're saying if there's repetition, there has to be change, or there has to be a new focus.
They need to know why they're doing it again.
Yeah.
The reason. I mean, for example, we were doing the Mozart 40 first movement, and the interesting thing about the Mozart first movement is that there's only two crescendo marks in the whole piece.
Right.
From there, um, and in one of the crescendos starts with a half bar over 2 bars. So the crescendo goes over 1.5 bars. And when we played through, first of all, there, notes were perfect. They were phrasing. They were doing, helping, working together. But they start the crescendo, they're looking ahead. They see the crescendo sign, so they start doing it. Stop. They're too early. Can you make sure you do the crescendo at the half bar, because it takes away the excitement? I really felt that Mozart wanted that short crescendo, so the forte comes as a real stabbing point. Okay, reason given, excellent, execution perfect.
Right. All on the same hymn sheet, so to speak.
I could do that.
Yeah.
The other thing which orchestras hate, and it's interesting, they hate the upbeat given at a different tempo to the downbeat.
I've been guilty of that.
Now the thing is that I see this time and time again when I'm called in to work with the choir and I see the conductor or on conducting courses, they're there. And they get a ragged start and the conductor stops and says, no, I had an example at a rehearsal I went into only a few weeks ago, where the choir had been reduced, the church from there, where twice the conductor went up and down quicker and it was ragged. And I couldn't believe it. The conductor said, no, you start, I'm doing 1, 2, and he counted them in. He went 1, 2. The choir started perfectly, and he said, "There you are. So you can do it." So, and he left it. In the performance, he couldn't go 1, 2. He did that quicker up, slower up, quicker down. They were ragged. It's his own fault.
So the teamwork starts before the piece begins.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, the point is, if they, I don't know if you've done this, but I've done this with the choirs. I've never done it with the orchestra, because I don't want to waste their time. Is that if you're, so we say it starts on first with the bar, you always do this and stop. And if you've done it right and they're used to you, they should feel the downbeat and come in exactly on the part place. A thing which I love doing with choirs is say, okay, certain sets of piece, whatever beat it starts on, all right, I give them notes, point, and then I say to them, okay, start anytime now. I don't conduct them, they have to start together. And invariably I say, no, you can do, even though it's pretty good, I say, no, you can do better than that. And the choir know that the people in the front row got the hardest, so they've got to listen that way to the breaths being taken. The people behind can see the necks and all the rest of it, and so they get a chance. But it enables them to really work as a team. So in other words, I always tell the choirs, really, is that communication is important. You communicate with the music, you communicate with the text, you communicate with the conductor, you communicate with each other, and you communicate with the audience.
Yes, and you've covered body language, you've covered
Absolutely.
visual, and you've covered auditory as well.
Yeah. Now, what I just say, working with a choir, sing the Hallelujah chorus. Right. They're all like this. Hallelujah. Whoa. Wait a minute. What are you singing about? Hallelujah. Say it. Hallelujah. Mean it. So why doesn't your body and face convey that?
Yes.
Why are you all stiff and starchy?
I always say it's party time for that one. That's party time, Hallelujah chorus.
Whatever. Now, the thing is, I say, do not forget the Walt Disney approach. Now, that's my own saying. So what is the Walt Disney approach? Party, family in a motor car. And they might go, sing, sing together, merrily, merrily, sing, sing. And while they're singing, they're smiling, they're looking at each other, and all the rest of it there. I mean, later on, of course, they go into the words by a monster. That's irrelevant, But that's what I mean, is that when you're singing, you hear, hallelujah, look around, why this special pose which I put on?
Yes.
And I'm going to be very dangerous now. This is some of the problems of the traditional male voice choir.
It's the problem of lots of traditional choirs, and in fact, the ideal place to solve this problem is South Africa. I think when you see South African choirs, boy, do they really feel the music. They sing from their soul, and they move with it, and they can't help but move.
Well, that's what I try to do, and very quickly I tell the choirs, if they're not singing too well, I say, okay, really communicate with each other, show enjoyment, and the audience will think it's wonderful.
Yeah, absolutely. Douglas Coombes, it has always been a delight to chat to you. You've been a friend for so many years. It's been wonderful. And obviously now you will be known as the Walt Disney of conductors. Thank you. Thank you so much, Douglas. Thank you.